The Press Box. We're live from the Kampala Serena Hotel, and as advertised on the brochure before, Mr. Johnny McKinstry is here tonight. Good evening, Johnny, and welcome to the show. Fantastic to finally have you on the Press Box.
No, thank you very much. It's great to be here. Obviously, we've known each other for a little while, but it's great to meet the guys here, and I'm looking forward to, you know, talking football.
Yeah, I was telling these guys we're very good friends from way back, and I don't know why Ugandans have a problem with it. You can't know a top coach personally?
You can't, but when you're Andrew Kabura and you name drop as often as Andrew Kabura does, sometimes we don't know what to believe. Yeah. So we thought this McKinstry thing was made up.
Was one of those. No, not a problem.
Now we'd like to apologize officially.
Fine. Johnny, you're welcome to the Press Box. We have so much to go into. A lot of it, probably 90% of it, will be the footballing side, talking about the players, why you found us and where we're headed. But we've got to start off a little personal, because you look at your CV on the African continent. You've done Sierra Leone, you've done Rwanda, then you've come to Uganda. What do you make of your journey across the African continent? How exciting has it been for you?
It's been excellent, really. It's a journey that I don't think 15 years ago I could have anticipated. For me, I've always been someone who believes in, if there's a good opportunity presented to you, you should never sort of turn away from it. I'm also someone who challenges. I don't like the easy road. I sometimes like going where the challenge will be, where you are going to be criticized if you don't do things well, and that there's that little bit of pressure. And so, you know, I was very comfortable living in New York at the time, working with the New York Red Bulls, when an old acquaintance sort of phoned me and said, would you be interested in moving to Sierra Leone to set up a football academy? And, you know, at that stage I was living right a few streets back from the Hudson River, and I chose to give it all up to live in a fishing village an hour outside of Freetown. So, but again, it was a decision made on football. It wasn't, you know, if you made it on a personal level in terms of how comfortable you live, you stay in New York. But in terms of, for me, I thought, where is the football opportunity? Where is the challenge? And that took me to Sierra Leone, and every move I've made since then has been based on the same things. You sometimes make personal sacrifices in order to take forward movement in this career, but equally you get a lot back for making those decisions. And, you know, I find myself here now in Kampala, hopefully for the next number of years. You know, we have a lot of hopes for the future, and those hopes aren't going to materialize in you know 1 or 2 months. It's going to take a few years, but we believe where we're going, and we believe we can get there.
Now, guys, the folks who are watching the Press Box tonight, you're going to please forgive yours truly, the host tonight, because I'll be flipping between accents as the show actually goes on. Here is the thing: when I'm speaking to people like Johnny McKinstry who have this accent, I struggle to keep the Ugandan accent. So guys, when you hear Gona and Wana at some point in this presentation, please understand. But I was going to ask you first about your time in Uganda, because if you travel this much across different countries to coach there, then you've got to integrate yourself with the communities. Before we came on air, you were telling me how you've traveled to a few beautiful places in Uganda. Tell me about that. What has your experience been like, football aside really, coming to Uganda, the weather, the people, the food, the beauty? What have you made of the Pearl of Africa?
It's been excellent so far. I've been here coming up to 6 months now. You know, it seems like I've only been here 2 or 3 weeks in many ways, but in other ways it feels like I've been here a few years, because as you've said, you know, for me, I always believe in trying to integrate yourself. You know, people who meet me, hopefully afterwards they think, you know, I'm quite down to earth, you know, I'm someone who's just a normal person. You know, sometimes in these roles that we all have, that we're in the public sort of space, that people know who we are, but people expect you to be very different, when in fact we're all just quite normal people. And for me, I think to really be successful in a place, you have to get to know a place, you've got to get to know the people, and you've got to get to know the culture as well as you can. Now, coming from outside, you maybe can never get to know it 100%, but you can definitely narrow the gap. And so for me, that's about getting to know local people, local places. As you said recently, you know, just before we got into this busy period, I got the opportunity to travel a little bit, got over to sort of Buwindi, sort of Queen Elizabeth Park and stuff, to see some of the natural beauty of this country, but also to meet different people. And yeah, for me, that's just in terms of life, that's so important. and it's so valuable, and I do think it feeds back positively in terms of our work in the sporting realm.
Okay, so guys, I'm going to bring you in very, very shortly after I ask my final question. The perks of being a host man. Yeah?
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah.
Johnny, you're 34, for God's sake. You're 34 years. I want to mention by age, but we're kind of close. I can confirm.
No,
I can confirm Rob is older than you, and yet he hasn't even coached the dormitory team at his school. But you're 34. For a young coach to have then this kind of CV of already managing 3 different African nations, plus a few teams outside of Africa, this means you started your badges so young. So this must have been a dream, what, 15, 14?
Yeah, for me, I was always quite self-aware. I think that was something that, you know, my upbringing gave me, to be quite self-conscious and self-aware of who you are and where you fit in to sort of the space you find yourself. And by sort of the age of 15, 16, I knew I was, you know, I would say I was a competent and, you know, forward-thinking player, but in Ireland, we have a semi-professional football environment. So if you want to be a pro footballer, you've got to be good enough to make the jump over to England. And, you know, big teams like Manchester United, Liverpool, Celtic, Rangers in the United Kingdom, they've got a long history of Irish players going and playing there and being successful. But I knew that while some of my teammates were maybe good enough to make that step over, that I was probably the level below that. But I always felt I understood the game. You know, I was probably that young player that coaches hated, because even at the age of 15, you know, our junior team coach would be, you know, giving the tactics before a game, and he'd be like, okay, does everybody understand? And I'd be that kid with his hand up going, but why is he playing there? Why should he not play on the left?
Do this?
And I was that at 15, and so I always, you know, felt I could see the game in a certain way. And so when I realized that maybe being a top player wasn't in my future, I sort of thought, could I coach this game? And so yeah, I took my first coaching session. But I did my first coaching badges when I was 16, but when I was 15, I did work experience as just a kids coach with the Irish Football Association. So I took my first, you say, you know, 34 years of age, but I took my first coaching session 18 years ago.
What?
So it's 18 years of learning and developing, and I've coached at every level of this game. I've coached 5-year-olds, I've coached the best, you know, one of the best players in Africa, in Dennis Onyango. So I've done the entire spectrum. So when people come to talk to me about football, you know, I've lived it. You know, I've been in every, you know, almost every continent. I've been in almost every environment, and, you know, I'm still learning every day. But that's the journey that we're on here, and it's good.
You inspire me a lot, Johnny. At 16, I was in Tungamo trying to name the 3 parts of an insect, so it was complete. But guys, please come in.
Oh dear. So he's the Irish Mourinho.
Yeah, he's Irish Mourinho.
Yeah. So you went to Bwindi. You've done the gorillas, eh?
Yep.
Did you gorilla truck?
Yep, went up. I can confirm that Uganda has bigger gorillas than Rwanda.
Yeah.
I've been in both of them, so yeah.
That's good to hear. That's very important. Did we get that?
I think they got it.
Hopefully.
Let's clip that and keep it,
we
guys.
need to replay that several times. For many
they're
reasons.
watching.
For many reasons, yeah. But then, you did the big cuts and Queen Elizabeth as well.
Yep.
So you can confirm the stereotype, which is well, I shouldn't call it a stereotype.
Yeah.
But Uganda is the most beautiful country in the world, right?
Oh, it's fantastic, and actually we stayed just by Lake Mutanda, and, you know, paradise just encapsulated. You know, you're there in a place that seems like someone has dreamt it up. It's just so unbelievable.
Yeah.
So yeah, just remarkable beauty. And again, I've only seen such a small part of this country, and hopefully over the coming years we'll get to see a lot more of it.
Yeah, we are featured in the Marvel series, you know.
Oh yeah, fantastic. But let's talk the football now. Let's talk the football now,
I
Mark.
need to ask him about when he talks about New York Red Bull. Does that mean that you worked with Ibrahim Sekatja? Do you know Sekatja personally, and have you worked together?
No, we didn't. Our times didn't overlap. So I still know some people who are at the New York Red Bulls in like the youth department. So me and Ibra have not met. Hopefully, I plan to go back to the United States for a bit of, you know, just check in with some of the clubs later this year in terms of maybe opportunities for Ugandan players. And definitely it's someone I feel it's important to sit down with, because I know he's done, from the reports I've heard from people I know in the area, he's doing some very good work over there. And yeah, I think it's important to keep those connections close.
Yeah. Rob, I want to bring you in, but can I help set the scene here.
Please.
African football, there was a time, Johnny, when we knew which team was going to win which game. Because if Cameroon or Nigeria was playing Niger or Angola, we kind of knew the results. Since you've been in Africa, so much has changed. The so-called small teams are no longer small teams. You have the likes of Cape Verde Islands making it to the Africa Cup of Nations quite consistently. Uganda doing fantastic as well. Where have you seen it gone, just before we start about your career here in Uganda?
Yeah, I think now, you know, football the world over is developing at such a rapid pace. I think now people are understanding that even if you don't have the superstar players, that you can still, you know, make such great strides forward in terms of raising your game. Like, you know, I even look back to my time next door in Rwanda, and, you know, we didn't have the big players. You know, the total transfer cost of our national team might have only been $1 million, but when we took the field against a team like Ghana, who was maybe, you know, $150 million, $200 million team, you're getting, you know, a draw, you're maybe losing 1-0 in the 90th minute as we did in Kigali, and so you really can narrow that gap with good planning and good organization. And especially when you look on this side of the continent in East Africa, I tend to find that just the planning and the organization and the logistics tends to be a lot stronger than sort of West African football, which tends to be a bit more chaotic in terms of just the management of the whole system. And I think that's where we're narrowing the gap. And definitely when you get to qualify for that first major tournament, the resources that come from that can really propel you for the next decade.
Okay. Rob?
Coach, when did you first encounter Ugandan football? And what were your impressions of Ugandan football? And please feel free to talk about the pluses and the negatives.
Yeah, I think obviously coming on, when I took the Sierra Leone job in 2013, one of the big things then is, obviously we weren't coming up against Uganda at the time, but it's funny, it's back then when a relationship with a former manager here began in Micho, because we were just about to play the Seychelles, I believe, and I got in touch through a mutual friend with Micho because I believe Uganda had just played them in a friendly or something like that. And I still remember I asked him, I said to him, you know, we didn't know each other, we got introduced, and I said, would you mind doing me a scouting report, because I don't have any video of the Seychelles team, because this was, you know, this is 7 years ago, before all of these databases and online platforms existed. And so he said, no problem, John, I will get you a scouting report after the game. And so I got an email from him after the game, and he basically said, John, they're a group of waiters on holiday. You don't need to worry about anything. To which I was like, that's maybe not the technical detail I was hoping for, to be honest. But you know, a good friendship with Micho developed from them. But so I became aware of Uganda back then, because when you're in communication with somebody, you're starting to look at what they're doing. And obviously at that time, I think, you know, Uganda's very unique in this part of the world in that the attributes of a Ugandan player are not necessarily that of other East African players. I always look at Uganda as being more similar to like Ghana in sort of footballing, you know, just the physical side, the technical side, you know, the attitude towards the game. It seems more of that central West African than it does, you know, traditional East African. And going back in time, that meant it was maybe a bit more aggressive, more physical, more robust. But now I also think we're in this really interesting period where that's starting to change. Like if you were to go back 10 or 15 years and look at a team photo of the national team, they'd all be big guys. You know, they're all 6 foot, 6 foot plus. Whereas now you look at our team and we have the likes of Farouk, we have the likes of Abdul Umala, you know, you have the likes of Alan Okello breaking through, who are very technical players who enjoy the ball at their feet. And, you know, even now, you know, I cringe at how few caps Michael Azira has for this national team, because... Do you? I just do. You know, you look at a player in his early 30s now, and he only has a handful of caps, yet such a talented player, but maybe that shows you that as he was growing, that type of player maybe wasn't as valued as he is nowadays.
That's the truth. That's how it is actually.
So I definitely think the landscape of Ugandan football is changing, and it's really exciting to be part of that, because it really is trying to take that next step forward in terms of the evolution of the game, which is both a challenge but also something to be really, you know, just enthusiastic about.
Yeah, so when you talk about Mitchell and your friendship, Mitchell has built the reputation as one of those guys who pays attention to detail. He's now gone to Zambia. He walks into a country and he'll tell you virtually everything about that country's football. To some footballers that one or two journalists might not even know in their own country. And so when he gives you that kind of scouting report, I'm thinking either he was serious, you are not any good, or he just didn't want to, because if he started to write a report, I'm sure it would be like a book, a few things like that. Are you cut from the same cloth? Do you pay that much attention to detail? Can we say you've just dropped 3 names of your players here? Farouk Mia, Abdul Mala, and Alan Okello. Can somebody say that McKinstry in 6 months knows virtually every Ugandan player and what they're about? How much attention to detail are you paying to Ugandan footballers abroad and home?
Yeah, for me, I'm probably very, pedantic on details. Some people even find it quite funny. I remember, in terms of being detail orientated, I remember when I moved from international football back into club football in Eastern Europe, and just in terms of the planning process, a lot of the staff I inherited at the club, it was almost a little bit of a running joke in the early days that I would have time limits on the water breaks and stuff like that in training, and they're like going, why is this important? I'm going, and I gave them the whole reason, heart rates will drop more, we want to keep the tempo of the session up. And so, for me, the small details are so important. It's like, it's that old saying, it's like, show me a man who doesn't take care of the small details, and I'll show you someone who can't be trusted with the big ones. And so I think for me that's important. But also it's important not to get lost in them. You've got to see the big picture as well. It's easy to get lost in the small details. So you've got to be able to zoom in, but then you've also got to be able to come back out and see the environment that you're in the big picture. And I like to think I get the balance reasonably well.
I want to come back to you, Mark, shortly, but I want to introduce him coming to Uganda, really. You signed a contract with the Federation, which none of us has seen. I can confirm that to the viewers. What are your targets, though, with Ugandan football? And I ask this because you come in at a time when we've just made the AFCON twice in a row. We are looking at the third one. We are growing as a footballing nation. So you definitely had targets. So, what do you consider a successful first contract for you? And more interestingly, where do you find our players? How much quality do we have here to compete across the African continent?
Yeah, so, and this is me being completely authentic and genuine. The targets when I came into this role were purely to take the next step forward, to improve the team. And it's one of the things I find really refreshing coming in and working with FUFA is that a lot of federations and clubs, they get a little bit of success and then they suddenly set these grandiose, almost impossible targets of, okay, we've got to the last 16, so now let's win it. We've qualified for an AFCON, now we must get to the group stages of a World Cup or it's seen as failure. But FUFA aren't like that. Even if you go back in 2015 when they set, Project 2019 to qualify for AFCON, they got there ahead of schedule in 2017. But they didn't suddenly rip up the original plan. They said, okay, we're ahead of schedule. Can we improve? Can we go again and can we improve? And they did. And it's the same now you look for the World Cup. It's not let's go to 2022. FUFA's project is 2026 because we currently find ourselves ranked 15th in Africa. At the moment, there's only 5 spaces at the World Cup. But in 2026, there's going to be 9 spaces at the World Cup for Africa. Now, in terms of that medium-term objective, can we move ourselves in to be a top 10 nation in Africa over the next 3 years? I believe we can. That's a personal target of mine. And if we move ourselves into the top 10 and there's 9 World Cup spaces, okay, you've still got to do the qualification series, but you should be in a serious conversation. But that being said, I think you know me a little bit. I'm a very positive person. I always think set big ambitions because then that's what inspires the soul, and helps us drive forward. So for me, yes, FUFA's mandate is can we go to the 2026 World Cup? But even before the draw, I was saying, well, we finished second the last time in a group that had Egypt, Ghana, and Congo, Brazzaville, which was a very difficult group. And second, obviously beating Egypt here.
Absolutely.
And so I said, well, let's see what group we get, but can we take a step forward? Can we win the group? Now, everyone knows winning the group doesn't take you to the World Cup. You've then got to beat another group winner. But if you can get into that playoff round, you've got a real chance. So for me, I go into this World Cup series, and the group we've got, can we finish first? And why not?
But Mark, let me ask you what McKinstry says, because you've talked about this on the show before. He says, can we get on top of that group? We might not qualify for the World Cup, but get into that space. And you've said this before, that as qualifying for the Africa Cup of Nations creates a whole new atmosphere in camp. So the more you qualify for the Africa Cup of Nations, that's more experience and probably more arrogance from the players. Is it exactly what he's saying?
Yeah, well, I believe that we, when he says that we can get on top of a group, it's an improvement from second before. And then that means that you give yourselves a chance in a playoff, in a one-off against another team. Anything can happen. I think because you started by saying how the gap is reducing in African football and all, which I always think you can give yourself a chance if that. There is, when Angola went to the World Cup in Germany, 2006, I thought that they surprised the whole of Africa. Then we thought that it was an elite club, an elite group of nations from Africa that could make the World Cup, and the Angolas were not part of it. So we can be the next Angola or something like that. I believe that is possible. But of course, it starts with us getting it right here with the AFCON. What are the immediate targets with the next AFCON? And because now we take it for granted that you've got to qualify, it's a bare minimum. What are the targets when we get there? And but then the other bit that I'd like for you to get into is what is informing your sport choices. Why is X out and why is Y in? What are you looking for in a Ugandan player? And why the particular group that you've called out? I'm sure you've seen one or two criticisms about this.
I'm going to read some of them for him later.
you will, yeah.
The Ugandans are not happy, I'm telling you.
I need for him to get, maybe I've jumped the gun a little bit there, but I need for him to get in there. I need to understand what kind of football do you want Uganda to play? What is the philosophy you're creating? How do you see us, and which people make that grade? Over McKinstry, Uganda. And so I need for you to paint that whole picture so we
can I add something just to concretize the question? Because looking from the outside, I would imagine you want to move Ugandan football from this position where they have been playing what you can call functional football to your possession-based football, which is going to involve a lot of things, one of which is the pitches, I would imagine. Because most of our players are predisposed to playing the way they do because of the quality of the pitches. And it's good that FUFA has noticed that, and they have sounded out UEFA, who's, I think, recently sent a pitch management expert who is advised them on what to do and what not to do to get, the quality of the pitches in that sort of range where people can play the kind of football that you'd want. I think it's also something that Sebastian Desabre, your predecessor, actually talked about. So is that right? And can we reach that position where we're going to get the kind of pitches that you want? Because for me, looking again from the outside, I noticed that there's been this appetite for artificial turf. You're from the UK, and most of the people in the UK actually frown.
I don't
the
think
United
he likes
Kingdom.
I don't think he likes
Okay,
UK.
no, it's from, sorry, no. Okay, so, okay.
Political battles.
Okay, no,
but I know what you
take that
mean.
back.
Not from the UK.
Okay, yes, it's not from the UK,
There is
actually.
neighbors.
Technically
There is
speaking, it's
neighbors.
not, yeah? But yes, they share characteristics. And anyway, the artificial pitches, there's been these question marks about them predisposing players to injuries, and we have seen more or less the same thing happening at KCA. The players, the injury list has been growing. So where do we move in terms of the kind of pitches, and also this appetite, this growing appetite for artificial pitches? What do you have to say about it?
Yeah, so in terms of, just to go through the various points there, I think first of all, to go back to Mark's point about the the targets in terms of AFCON. For us now, we need to both stabilize and try to build on top of. So we've now been to 2 AFCONs in a row. I think you're right. There is maybe a sense in the public that now it's the given that we go to AFCON, that qualifying for AFCON in some ways is you just do it. But that's not true. As we've said, you know, all countries now, you know, if they get a good run going, anyone can pose a problem. Like, even you look at the upcoming games against South Sudan. Now, you go back 5 or 6 years ago, and South Sudan were losing games 4-0, 5-0. But in the opening 2 games of this qualifying group, okay, they lost 1-0 in Malawi, but they hit the post twice. And then at home, in not really their home, in Khartoum, so a neutral venue, they only lose 2-1 to Burkina Faso. So again, they are now much more stubborn than they've ever been, and so the gap is closing. So to take these games for granted would be at our own detriment and would put us at great risk. So, you know, and definitely inside the camp, nobody's taking anything for granted. We know that we've got to be at our very best in order to progress forward. Otherwise, you know, you look at a country even like Madagascar and stuff, who've made such huge progress in recent years. So you can't sort of rest on your laurels at all. You've got to move forward. But can we go again? First of all, let's qualify. Let's get that done. And then it's about, can we become accustomed at getting into those knockout stages, because knockout football is so different than group play football. You know, managing the emotions, managing, you know, the clock in a game. If you're leading, how do you see out a game? All of these things, if you have to go to penalties. You know, knockout football is something that Uganda don't have a lot of experience with. And so it takes time to move forward in that. But definitely, we want to be experiencing those knockout stages as often as possible. And the more we do, the more success that can come because of that, through that experience. In terms of player selection, I think really one of the big things, so 2 things factor into that. One is our idea of football, okay? And I know you said about, you know, this passing style of football. And so for me, I've always believed, you know, football is an entertainment sport. You know, football is no different than going to the theater, going to the cinema. You're going somewhere for a couple of hours and you want to be entertained. Okay, now on the business side of it, for us, you know, we've got to win, because if you don't win, you don't stay around for too long. I understand that. But, you know, for me, yes, I want to have more of the ball, but also I would be more of, you know, I'd consider myself more of a realist than an idealist. For me, you always have to take into account, you know, what tools do I have? You know, who are my opposition? Who's the enemy? But also the environment. What is the pitch like? And with all fairness, I think we would all agree that, you know, if Barcelona came to play at Nambule,
they'll be in trouble, my friend.
Yeah, they might struggle a little bit.
Messi couldn't manage Wadada on that one.
You think? So we also, we have to pick our moments. Yes, we want to have more of the ball, but equally we have to understand that there's no point us saying we want to play 10, 15 passes in our own half at the risk of the ball taking that little bad bounce and all of a sudden someone's broken through and has scored a goal and you're 1-0 down. So for us, it's one of the things I came in, because I think we would all agree, you know, you all obviously know my first assistant, Abdullah Mubiru, and, you know, his teams here in the UPL are characterized by their passing style.
Yes.
And one of the things, you know, our discussions was that, you know, when we came in, you know, I think Abdullah, almost you said, you know, it's a passing style. But one of the things I think that maybe he thought in our early conversations was that I wanted to play long ball football. Now, I think if you've watched any of the Ugandan games over the last few months, you couldn't accuse us of trying to play long ball. We're definitely not doing that. But what I wanted, you know, to really get across is this realism of, yes, we want to pass and possess the ball, but we have to do it in a realistic fashion that doesn't risk too much. Yes, we want to have the ball, but equally we want to go forward. Possession has to have a purpose to it. We want to go forward. So how we want to play influences team selection, but also for me, I know in the past, when as Ugandan football has been developing, just simply playing outside maybe meant you're in the team. Didn't matter how many minutes you were getting, didn't matter if you were in a good league in Europe or a weaker league in Europe. It was, he is the professional. And I actually have a big issue with people not considering the UPL professional, because the definition of professional is you get paid to do a job. and you do it in a full-time environment, and that is what all UPL players do. They train every day, they get paid to do it, therefore they are professional. And I think that needs to be a mindset shift, because if you consider yourself amateur, then you prepare amateur. Whereas if you consider yourself professional, you will start to prepare professionally. So I think that's a big thing we need to change in terms of the footballing culture here. But going back to player selection, if you look at the squad we've called now, the 20 foreign-based players we've listed, and we're obviously going to add 5, we've reserved 5 spaces for UPL players that will be added in the next couple of weeks following Ferver Chan sort of training sessions. But those 20 players, 13 of them are 90-minute every week players. 13 of them are the first name on their team sheet. They're getting 90 minutes every week, and then the other sort of 6, 7 in the group are guys who are in the first team environment. They're on the bench, they're getting 30 minutes, they're starting the occasional games. There is no one in that squad, barring obviously one young player who we believe is a very exciting prospect, which I'm sure we'll come to speak about, Jaden. But all of them are in their first team environments. They're competing for first team places. And that maybe you couldn't have said that in the past. There was maybe in the past people who weren't in their first team squads who maybe didn't even have a club, but were being called to the national team. And
so that's out, where you're concerned, that's out.
Yeah.
If you're not playing, if you don't have a club, you're not coming to the
and I had that, we can name it. I had that conversation with Juco, and he understood where I was coming from, and I simply said to him on 2 reasons. One, I'm not sure you can be fully fit and match ready if you don't have a club. But secondly, I think it sets a really bad precedent for all of the other players. If players are working hard, no matter what level of the game they're playing at, and they see someone coming in who doesn't have a club. Now, look, if someone's just been released at the end of their contract and the game, so their contract finishes 31st of May and the game is Burkina Faso on the 6th of June. Technically, they're without a club, but that's maybe a unique situation. But if you've not been playing for 3, 4, 5 months, genuinely, I don't think the national team is the place for you to advertise.
So that's why Juco is out.
Yes, and he knows that.
Johnny, I want us to go for a quick break because we're running out of time. Then when we come back, we'll answer something from Madoy about the facilities. I want you to also answer something about using a largely Ugandan coaching staff when you moved here. Because if a couple of coaches don't do that, they want to move with their own team. Then we can talk about the team itself, because there's a couple of names here that have gotten Ugandan speaking. Actually, some are suggesting you're not giving that much attention to the Uganda Premier League. But also want to let you know that you might have to think of a new Uganda Cranes captain, because part of the reactions we're having online involves Dennis Onyango, who has tweeted us and said, and you'll answer this after the break, that ask Mr. McKinstry why he is younger than me. So we might think about a new captain of the Uganda Cranes. Dennis Onyango, just in case you didn't get that phone call for the next Uganda Cranes squad, he doesn't like folks who are just
so he's being stripped right
and they're
here.
talking a little bit too much about it. It's the press box. We're back shortly.
I've been around in the city, party in the city. Everybody's talking about swag in the city. Bottles up, get the party lit with swag. Roll what you went day. Get your party started with swag. Carbonated alcoholic beverages in 3 different styles: extreme, screwdriver, and twist. Grab yourself a swag bottle now and change the way you party. Swag is available in shops, supermarkets, bars, and clubs near you. Swag is not for sale to persons under 18. Swag responsibly.
In preparation for the 2020-2021 general elections, the Electoral Commission has appointed 19th February to 10th March 2020 as the period for display of the National Voters Register. The display of the register shall begin at 8 a.m. and end at 6 p.m. on each day, including weekends, at all polling stations throughout Uganda. The purpose of this display exercise is to enable voters to check for the correctness of their particulars on the register. This is an important exercise which could determine whether you vote on polling day or not. Therefore, come and check for the correctness of your particulars on the register. Announced by the Electoral Commission.
With support from United Nations Development Programme, UNDP.
This season,
you too can play like a champion and win amazing prizes off the page. Simply buy a 300ml glass bottle of Pepsi, check under the crown, and what you see is what you win. You can win phones, radios, sodas, t-shirts, and redeem your prizes from any Pepsi depot countrywide. You can also send a unique code to 7888 to win instant airtime daily or stand a chance to win up to 5 million shillings in our weekly TV draws. Pepsi, the official sponsor of the UEFA Champions League. Pepsi, for the love of it. Terms and conditions apply.
Amanya gange bampita Kamusime Ziriba. Myaka ejo 22 gye maze nga mvuga bus. Nagitambuza bulungi nnyo nga mvuga bulungi naye nenzija ninfunako kampuni emu. Nebeera nga dereva emukozesa nnyo nga teyagala kumanya nti dereva akoowa. Nali ngenda Goma otuukayo ku lunaku lwakusatu ate oli dereva omu. Bwe natuuka e Goma ntwala baasi ku mazzi nenaaba ningenda ewange ne batika baasi yange nga tebambuulidde. Era nali ndyawo mpuumuddeko ng'amanyi nti nja kgenda olunaku oluddako. Nali ndyawo ne bankubira Kamusiime jangu baasi ejjudde nga tukulaba kyandeetera okupapa. Ninjayo ku mulimu era ninkwata baasi ningenda. Bwe nasanga trailer nesibira hampu y'ettaka bali bakozeewo diversion. Olw'otulo n'obukoowu olw'obukoowu bwali buyingidde mu bwongo nagenda okwesanga nga ndaba trailer naye nagiyingiramu nga njiraba. So mbadde nkubiriza badereva bannange abavuga baasi tuteekemu okwebalirira. Nkubiriza ne bakama baffe abatukozesa bannyinizi baasi babaliririre dereva. Tweddeko obulamu tebugulwa.
This message was brought to you by Viva Energy and NTV Uganda.
What is going on in my house?
No, Santiago,
No, I'm going to call
let me
him.
explain.
Perfect then. Explain to me why Damian is offering my daughter a job. And why did my wife argue with this man and nobody even tells me anything? Why are my children hiding things from me? I mean, why is everybody looking for a job? Is it because I am useless now?
Damian, the company is in chaos. Santiago's workers were fixing the main pipe and they accidentally broke it, and now the water is coming out. We don't know what to do. We need your help. There is water everywhere.
All right, I'm on my way. They broke one of the water pipes at the company. I have to go there to solve things. Hey.
You're just joining us now. Where have you been, my friend? But we shall discuss that later. We are still getting so many answers in online and so many questions for the national team head coach, Mr. Jonathan McKinstry, who is telling us everything about Ugandan football and how much he's loving this beautiful country. During the break, we're just having a small conversation about how much Luganda you have learned. If I threw you into the taxi park, can you get yourself out while having a meal?
Well, I might have to call you for assistance a little bit there, but no, I'm picking up a little bit. So
which words have you learned?
Things like just general greetings, like Oleotia, Bulingi, all of these things, Wibale, all of just small things.
That's all ones, yeah.
Fantastic. Before we went for a break, though, Mr. Madoy had talked about facilities, and it's a general discussion. It's a wider discussion in terms of Ugandan sport. But let's stick to football. Your playing style and the facilities we have at the moment, you sometimes put the FUFA president, Engineer Moses Mogogo, aside and say, dude, you've got to improve this.
Well, I think when you're inside the building, sometimes you're more aware of what's going on that sort of medium to long-term planning. So you see there's a new facility starting to take shape near FUFA HQ over in Mengo. Obviously, the Federation were gifted land by the King of Buganda for the new Buganda Stadium, and I believe my understanding was back at the last sort of when I was appointed, the sort of assembly, the General Assembly for FIFA, the new stadiums that, in conjunction with the Chinese sort of government, a couple of new stadiums. So again, it's a step-by-step process. And you've got to remember, these things, they're not cheap. You know, you have to find the money, you have to find partners, you know, all of these things cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then people would say, oh, well, FIFA money, et cetera, but then that has to be spread quite far and wide.
Papa John, you are in Kigali, Rwanda. You look at the facilities Rwanda has put up, football pitches.
Yeah.
They have one of the biggest basketball courts on the African continent now. So I understand when you say it's expensive, but do you think we don't have much of the will to actually put them out there?
Well, no, but I also think it's a process in the sense that in Rwanda, you look at basically every year as part of your FIFA funding, there's enough money to do a capital project every year, like one a year. So if you wanted to, you could put one artificial pitch in per year, but you couldn't do anything else in terms of building. And so what Rwanda did was over the course of 4 or 5 years, they put in, you know, pitch by pitch. But then the other thing was, because they were then hosting Chan, they had the stadiums, but they didn't necessarily have the training facilities. But then there was additional support was forthcoming in terms of from CAF, from FIFA, to do those training pitches. So a lot of things came together in order to allow them to do that. But it really is a course of, if you commit to it over the course of 4 or 5 years, you can then, like in the Rwandan Premier League, have, you know, 80% of the matches being played on artificial turf. Now, one of the things you were asking before the break was, you know, just in terms of, is that a good thing necessarily? And, you know, for me, look, as a purist of football, if you give me a good grass pitch to play on, I want to play on it. But, you know, I've caveated that by saying a good grass pitch. And ultimately, I understand that the maintenance of good quality grass is not always easy. Now, as you highlighted, we've had some experts over from UEFA, you know, that through this sort of knowledge sharing program that is being run by FIFA, you know, FIFA are engaging with that because we're not ignorant to it. You know, we wouldn't have asked for that assistance if we were ignorant to the fact that we need to improve the pitches. And so it's the first steps in the right direction. But definitely, I think over the next few years, with the facilities we've mentioned already, plus that outside support, we can start to get better facilities. And better facilities will not only improve the quality of the Ugandan Premier League, but also of the young players that we're developing. You know, we'll get more technically gifted young players because they're training on better quality surfaces.
Mark, and the synthetic pitch and the injuries, is there a correlation?
I haven't looked at the information very recently, but I remember this was one of the big things. I obviously worked in the United States where 90% of surfaces that young players play on is artificial. And actually, back then, looking at the data, there isn't really a correlation in terms of it. There's like anecdotal evidence, but in terms of actual raw evidence of non-contact injuries, because that's what you're looking at. Contact injuries are going to happen regardless of bad tackle, but non-contact injuries, there really isn't a big difference.
Let's quickly jump into the team itself, into the final 15 minutes of the show, the real content. And I'll start off with Mark, so maybe we can come to Johnny right after that. Here it is, the squad. And some of the Ugandans are looking at Farouk Mia not being part of it. Farouk Mia has been probably Uganda's most important player in the last 2 AFCON qualifications, whether it's the goals that take us there or doing well, for example, in Gabon, I think scoring the only goal we scored in Gabon. But then, Mark, there's been more question marks now raised over players that maybe Ugandans don't either know much about or haven't watched more. And they've been called in by Johnny. I mean, you can go on with Uchechuku, Mubiru, you can go with Jaden, you can go with Elvis Okello. Before he probably explains the inclusion of these players, do you feel the fresh breath of air in the side? Do you feel McKinstry is going out there and picking as many options to bring this together? Are you excited about that?
Yeah, well, I'd like for him to tell us what informed those decisions. And what I like about it generally is that it looks then that the team is extending its scouting. It's a global outreach on looking for players and all. In the past, it's one of those things that I always wanted us to do, which we didn't do well. And then the Ugandan football fraternity was not very receptive of first-timers, of guys who walked in here who had not grown up here, hadn't kicked a ball for Villa Express or KCCA, and then showed up because they'd grown up in the academy at Colchester or something like that. I remember how so badly we treated Kitamirike. And how so badly we judged one or two other players. Mutumba and all. Guy plays one game and you think you know them. And then you've made your decision about whether they're good enough or not. And I was thinking this is not good, not good at all. So when it's changed over time now. I mean, guys have walked in here and then been instant successes, which is perhaps what was needed to give the others a chance.
Bevis walked in and did well.
And as did Abdul Umala. And that then gives these guys the benefit of doubt if we hear of a new name. But I'd like to understand how we arrived at this, what kind of scouting McKinstry is doing for him to know about Uche Mubiru or Jaden, who's not even playing as a first teamer, like he said, or Alexis Baka. Those guys in there. He needs to. He needs to tell us about those, and then what effort is going into this kind of thing. Is there a special team that is going out there looking for anybody who's got a drop of Ugandan DNA? How is it?
Yeah, so I think, the first thing you mentioned there in terms of going out there and trying to cast the net out really and see who's available, because I think, the world now is in many ways becoming a smaller place because it's so easy to travel now. It's, people get work opportunities abroad, etc. And so really, if you're not tapping into the diaspora that have went out there, Ugandans who've maybe moved abroad and had children, they are still Ugandans. If you are born of Uganda, then you are Ugandan. And so that's one of those things that if we cut ourselves off from that, then we're losing a potential huge talent pool. And that's not just in football, that's in any walk of life. And so for us, it's about looking at the whole spectrum of who's available for us. And we want to have the most competitive national team possible, players who can compete. Nobody is promised playing time. Not from Dennis Onyango to Emmanuel Okwi to Lumala to Uche who's coming in. Nobody, people ask, where do you see me in the team? And my answer is always, I believe, if I'm talking to you, it's because I believe you fit into what we're trying to do, where we want to take the team. However, your minutes on the field will be dictated by your performance. And if your performance is of that level, then you will get your opportunity, and you've got to take that opportunity. For the new boys who've come in, we went out, we've probably got a list of a dozen or so players playing at good levels of the game who we feel could come and represent Uganda. There's other players playing semi-professional football or lower division football who at this moment in time we've said, look, keep pushing forward in your career, but at this moment you're not at the level that would justify a call up to what is now a highly competitive national team, qualifying for tournaments. Of those 12 or so we think are of the level. Some of them are slow burners. They are interested, but they're not maybe willing to dive in right now. And that might be because they're young, or there's a variety of reasons. There's other players who have said no, they're not interested. They they consider them. Look, and that's fine, because maybe if you are, have a Ugandan parent and you have an English parent or an American parent, you might have grown up and say, because I do ask them, I say, do you feel Ugandan? Is your Ugandan heritage of importance to you? Because I've had issues in the past. With Sierra Leone, we had a player who was born in England and to Sierra Leonean parents, or one Sierra Leone parent, and we brought them, and they hadn't been brought up with any great respect of their Sierra Leonean heritage, and you could feel that when they came into the national team camp. They were treating it as some sort of vehicle to improve their own career. And look, it's okay to want to improve your own career. If you do well for the national team, of course you're going to get personal benefits, but that can't be the sole driving factor. You've got to, your heart's got to beat a bit faster when you walk out at Nambule. That's like a core principle of mine. This has got to mean something to you. You're not playing for Villa. You're not playing for Express or Vipers. You're not playing for Motherwell. You're playing for a nation that is representing, 40 plus million people, and it's so important. Okay, it's so important. And so if players don't feel that, then we say to them, this maybe isn't the opportunity for you. But also that can change for them. Some people, as they grow older and mature, reconnect with their roots a bit more. And so that's vital. And for the three boys who've agreed to come in now, they all feel that.
Yeah.
You know,
They
do. They, you know, I've met them personally. We've had coffee. You know, we've discussed over a period of time. This isn't. Some people maybe think this happens over the course of like a week, but it doesn't. You know, we've been talking to these boys, you know, going back 3 or 4 months now, in terms of making sure it's the right time, that they're ready for it.
And FIFA is facilitating this? Do they facilitate you to go out there and meet these players?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of, now sometimes we balance it up, you know, with in terms of maybe I'm back in the UK anyway, and we sort of say, okay, we're going to extend that stay, and we're going to go to this place to meet this player. But also, you know, in football, we don't work in this game in isolation. In the same way in all of your own industries, you have a network of contacts.
Yeah.
It's the same thing for Uche Mubiro, for example. His manager at Heart of Midlothians last season is a personal friend of mine. So when we established the link, I was able to phone up Craig Levine, the former Scotland manager, and say to him, you worked with Uche. What do you think of him as a person?
Yeah.
What's he like on the training ground? All of those things you don't see when you watch games in the stadium or on TV. So you're able to get personal recommendations of people saying he's good at this, he's not so good at this, he'll be good in this environment, etc. So we do our research and our due diligence on it. And yeah, we're excited about these boys.
If I asked you who of these is likely to, I mean, they've got to prove themselves, I know, on the training ground, along with their mates and all, but who of them do you think is most ready? Who is going to walk in there and perhaps start the next Ugandan Cranes game? Who would you bet on?
Well, I think with Uche, he's someone who's more of a seasoned professional. You know, he's been around. He's only 24, but you know, he's you know, a very mature, you know, very driven person. I think actually the Ugandan supporters are really going to love him when they get to know him, because he has such huge drive. You know, when I talk to him, when I'm in his presence, he's just, you come away from a meeting with him and you feel energized. He's just that type of character, and he'll be great to have around the team, both just as a player but also as a character. And so he's probably the most polished of the three players. But then you look at someone like, you know, Elvis Okello-Bomono, and he's just turned 21 last week. And in the next couple of weeks, he's going to make his 100th professional appearance in League One in England. And that's, League One in England's a tough league. You've got to, there's not a lot of teenagers playing in that league. But since he's been 18, he's been playing every week, And to be honest, you know, I know that he's on the radar of a few Premier League clubs, a few Championship clubs. So, you know, with a bit of luck, he could be Uganda's, you know, next, you know, I know we, big star in the Premier League. So you talk about Tanzania.
Is he right back or?
Yeah, he's a right back.
Let me quickly go through 3 or 4 messages. Then we can have a few final questions as well, because I think I want to ask you about the coronavirus. It's running wild. We have Chan in Cameroon. We have the Africa Cup of Nations.
That Chan squad is quite interesting because there's a few omissions and additions that were quite.
We're going to ask him that because we have about 10 minutes to wrap up the show. But for me, an interesting one is because you've talked about a couple of young players, which is fantastic for continuity in Ugandan football. But then how do you balance that with the experience? Because like I was asking Sebastian Disabre the first time we had him on the show, he came into the team at a time, I think, when Massa was leaving, so he had to find a striker in there. Now you have one of the oldest players in the team attacking you on Twitter, Dennis Onyango, also the captain of the side. Well, not oldest in terms of age, Onyango, you know what I mean. But it says, ask him why he's younger than me, and I'm sure he's being cheeky, definitely, but how crucial is he to his team?
Well, I also think his problem's probably not that I'm younger than him. It's probably that I'm better looking than him.
Knee high, yeah?
But, you know, it was one of those first conversations I had when, I'm sure the players would tell you this, when I came in, my first 2-3 days in office here were constantly spent on the telephone. I spoke to all of our players based abroad, you know, for 5-10 minutes each. Spoke to them about what they wanted to do, you know, what they hope for the future of the team, you know, what they felt about their role in the team, and obviously with the local based players I was able to meet them in person. We had a Chan qualifier coming up, and but Dennis, you know, he was coming over, and ahead of the Ethiopian friendly we met, we had coffee, you know. I think it was supposed to be a 30-minute meeting. It ended up being a 2.5-hour meeting, but that was just purely because we were talking football. And Dennis is a hugely experienced player, and you know, he has a vast wealth of knowledge and just, you know, drive, and he wanted to know what I felt for his future in the team, and look, he is the best goalkeeper in Africa. There's no doubt about that. When you have a goalkeeper like that, you know, behind your back line, it allows you to go and maybe take more calculated risks in terms of how you press the game. And I think you've seen that with our home-based boys, that we're trying to go and press the game a bit more than maybe previous generations of the Cranes have done. But when you have that, you know, just that player, that sort of just mountain of a man in goal, it gives players confidence to go and do that, because they know if they do make a little mistake, he's going to make the save. But at the same time, you know, Dennis is there. He's our #1 goalkeeper. He's our captain. But I'm also so pleased that I know that at Mamelodi Sundowns, they're always saying it's such a big challenge for them, Pitso's like, because we can't sign other quality goalkeepers because they don't want to come here and compete with Dennis, because they know they're never going to get playing time. And that's true. I understand that in a club environment. But here at national level, we have quality goalkeepers almost on a conveyor belt that, you know, Dennis is obviously now 34, but you look at, obviously, Robert Adonkakara is, you know, in his early 30s. You then have Jamal, who's 27 now, I believe. You go down to Charles here in the local league.
Who you invited to the Chan team?
Charles,
even when he's injured.
Well, he's training again, so you know, I think the initial reports on Charles were maybe not as accurate as they could have been, but we're confident Charles will be fine.
Okay, Mark, I think, Mark, I'm going to give you just 2 final questions. That is how great the guest is. We are fully out of time. 2 final questions for Rob, and then as the host, I will have 3 questions.
I want him to quickly go through that Chan team and say why Bagole was not called onto the team, why Julius Poloto should walk into the team after a year out, and yet in the same KCCA team, Saddam Juma will not, and then that kind of thing. What informed some of the choices you made for the Chan? Why? I mean, some senior players in the league. I mean, Frank Calanda, for example, made a case by scoring a few goals for Express, including I think the winner in the very last game against Maroons. And but then guys like Dennis Ahabwe and Rothomio are they ahead of him? What informed this? How much do you know about these players actually? Is it you, or is it Abdallah Mobiru picking these guys? What's going into this?
Well, first of all, it's a technical team discussion. You know, so the final decision ultimately rests with me, but it is a technical team discussion because we are all there every week seeing players play. You know, if people are supporters of the UPL, they'll see me most weeks I'm at 3 or 4 games. You know, I go to as many games as possible to watch as many players as possible, because it's the only way you can really get to know a player's style. You know, is he good at home? Is he good away from home? All of these things.
That's reassuring.
And you know, so I'm at those games. And so when it comes down to picking the players, look, you know, the guys, the supporters' favorites who've maybe been left out, you know, I've seen them. You know, and it's not that, and I've said this before, it's not that I think they're bad footballers, it's that I think they're different than what we are looking for within this playing model, okay? David Bagoli, for example, is a very good footballer, but maybe more of a maverick. You know, maybe someone who, yes, has the technique and the skills and, you know, some of the moves, but then I look at someone like Bright Anokani, who are very, you know, with those stealth passes that he has. And it's just, every coach has preferences in terms of the playing style. And that's really what it comes down to. Also, you mentioned, you know, some experienced players in the league. Look, if a player's good enough, if he's the standout player in a position, he'll get picked regardless of whether he's young or old. However, Chan, if you think back to why Chan was invented, it was invented to provide a platform for talented players to showcase what they have to go to the next level in their career. Now, I remember in 2016, when we were there with Rwanda, we lost in the quarterfinal against DR Congo in extra time. You know, we felt had we won it, we could have went on the whole way. That was just the atmosphere in the team. But anyway, we lost the game. Now, the DR Rwandan team had an average age of sort of 21 and a half. It was really like an Olympic team. We had a few older players, but primarily a U21 team. The DR Congo were very different. Their average age was sort of 28, 29. They had a lot of very experienced players from Vita Club, from TP Mazembe, from all of these teams. They won the tournament. But at the end of that tournament, there was maybe only, I think, 2, possibly 3 DR Congo players transferred
to a senior team,
to more, but also to just more established leagues, to go to Europe or something. Whereas that Rwanda team, we got knocked out in the quarterfinals. 7 of our players moved and got bigger contracts, and
because
the
of
players,
their age.
because they were young players and teams were willing to sign them. So I also think we want to do well at Chan. We want to get into the knockout stages, and if we get into the knockout stages, our mentality around this tournament, I get asked who can win Chan, and my response is, why not us? That's not saying it's easy. Of course it's not. It's international football. But if we can get into those knockout stages, if we can break that barrier that's been there for Uganda for the last 10, 12 years, then why not us in knockout football? Why can we not go there?
Coach, goals. Me, I want to take you back to the issue of goals. It's a given that they have been in scant supply in Uganda, both in across international and club football. And for international, your antidote seems to be Uche. But looking at his goals per game return, I was just looking at the statistics. 34 goals across 181 club appearances. That is not reassuring, is it? Someone would even say it's a poor man's version of Geoffrey Massa.
Well, I think to come in on that, I also think you have to appreciate the levels of the game as well, in terms of, if a player is playing at a lower level of the game but scoring a lot of goals compared to playing at a higher level of the game. Look, again, we said Uche is 24, yet you've just said, what, 180 games? 181 games. So 181 games at 24, that means that consistently throughout his career, managers have trusted him to put him into the lineup. And then if you look at just the spread of his goals, when he was 18, 19 in the team, he maybe wasn't scoring so many, and as he matured a little bit, and he's still a young man, but he also brings a lot more to the game, because you talk about scoring goals, and I think for a long time in the past, Uganda played quite a direct style of football. So maybe that one striker was on his own, or 2 strikers on his own. Whereas we are trying, if you look at that now midfield zone, the likes of Farouk Mia, the likes of Lumala, Emma Okwi is obviously an experienced player on that side, but all of those guys playing off a lead striker. And look, this isn't saying that Uche is a guaranteed start. And I think you can see that back to the Malawi game, where, obviously we had Patrick Kadu, who'd been to AFCON, who'd scored goals, but we looked into that game and we said, no, Fad Bayo is the guy for this game. And so, just because I said at the beginning of the show, people think in the past, if you played outside, you're guaranteed to play for the Cranes. But that is not the case anymore. If a UPL player is the right answer to the question that we're being posed,
he plays.
Then he's going to play.
Johnny, I mean, we're out of time. Absolutely out of time, which is really pathetic for us, because we also haven't had a guest that discusses this much football. To be honest, I don't think we've had a football coach who has discussed this much football. So for us, it's a pleasure to have you here. And we can't add more questions because of time. We're about 10 minutes running late. But I'll ask you the last question. So what's your roadmap like moving forward? And I ask this because you have Chan, then you have the AFCON qualifiers, but all this comes with coronavirus. Some of the players you have called are playing in England, meaning they're going to have to go through a certain type of airports and certain flights. They might come here and they have 2-week quarantine at the airport. It's generally a risky time for world football and traveling, is it? So with your program moving forward and coronavirus, hectic times, Johnny.
Yeah, look, we put a lot of effort into planning and having plan B and plan C in a variety of things, whether it's playing style, whether it's the logistics of a camp. And so, yes, we're in uncertain times globally. And here, thankfully here in Uganda, we don't have any cases yet, and long may that continue. And because of that scenario, we also have to, listen to the advice of the government, of the Ministry of Health, to make sure that it doesn't come in. Because look, we all want to play football matches, we love football, but in the big picture, it really is the less important thing. You know, so we will continue to work, we'll continue to prepare diligently so that when those games come around, we are ready to perform at our best and hopefully get the results that we all crave. But at the moment, we're given different guidance by the authorities, whether that be the football authorities and FIFA or CAF, or whether it's the governments. Then we just have to follow that. And, you know, unfortunately for me, I have to say, I've got experience of that in the past, because obviously I was Sierra Leone coach when the Ebola virus broke out to devastating impact in West Africa. And, you know, we had to put in place many, you know, just you know, logistical things to make sure we could play games. And it wasn't good, but you know, as we said, football has to come secondary sometimes, but we'll keep planning, we'll keep working, and you know, hopefully those games go ahead, and we're planning for it, and we're planning to put in top performance.
Johnny McKinstry, coach of the Uganda Cranes, thank you very, very much. You have a game on the 17th of March against Zambia. We have a mini tournament here, Zambia, Mali, and Uganda preparing for CHAN, so wish you the best from that.
Thank you.
We shall also hopefully, and we really request you come back to the show at some point so we can have a bigger discussion. Because this guy is very disappointed. You can see his face. He had 3 questions to ask, or 5, and he
I could talk to him. I could talk with him for a day, for an entire night, if you allowed us here. But
but we shall have some time. Johnny, thank you very much for joining us. It's such a pleasure. Final message to Uganda Cranes fans out there who probably are listening to you at length for the first time.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, be part of the journey. You know, it's easy for a lot of people to come and support, you know, when we get to tournaments, but really, you know, come along every step of it, grow with the team, and when we achieve that success, you know that you've been part of it, because the players and the staff really do value it. So we hope to see you at Nambule for the game against South Sudan on the 28th, for the friendly games before that, and yeah, be part of that journey and enjoy the success along with us.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the technical team as well that have made sure the show is very possible. And of course, you at home who has been joining us throughout the evening. The discussion does continue throughout the week. The hashtag is NTV Press Box. And because Johnny is leaving now, personally, I'm resetting to my normal accent. That is because I want to think about going home now, which I'm going to do this evening. Good night.